Our next speaker, Mr. David Kessler, is one of the most well-known experts on death and grieving today. He is the co-author of 2 highly regarded books on grief and grieving and life lessons. His first book, The Needs of the Dying, is often the #1 selling hospice book and received praise by Mother Teresa. His new bestseller book is Visions, Trips, and Crowded Rooms: Who and What You See Before You Die. He has an elaborate track record in the establishment and grant funding of hospice care organizations. David grew up in a Jewish home. His work has been featured on CNN, NBC, Fox, MSNBC, PBS, and Entertainment Tonight. He is a contributing writer on Oprah.com and Dr. Oz's ShareCare.com. He serves on the Police Critical Incident and the Red Cross disaster teams. He is also the founder of Grief.com. Without further ado, please welcome David Kessler.
Thank you very much for that. I think we're going to dim the lights just so we can see the screen a bit better up there. Perfect. She said a number of wonderfully kind things about me. She forgot to tell you that I was also president of my 9th grade class 2 years in a row. So I was asked tonight at the table, what am I going to talk about and what's the biggest challenge I have in my work? And the biggest challenge that I have in my work is misperceptions about medical care and what the realities are. And you've heard tonight about people who made clear choices. It's easy to talk about right and wrong choices, but beyond the right or wrong is, do people have adequate information to make clear, good choices for themselves? So I'm going to challenge you a bit with some tough medical information, but I hope in the end you will walk away feeling prepared to make life's tough challenges. So first of all, you heard a bit about my background. Let me just skip that. I don't know if you saw this in the news the other day. It talked about the disappointment with the World Health Organization Monday at the findings that despite the efforts of doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals worldwide, the global death rate still remains at 100%. In other words, we're all going to die someday. For any of you who are more visual learners, this is what it looks graphed out. So as you can see, it's something we're all destined to do. And yet we have to talk about it. But it's a bit like Woody Allen says, I don't mind dying, I just don't want to be there when it happens. This is something that obviously scares us and worries us and keeps us awake at night. And so it's good that we take these times, and I applaud the courage tonight and the courage of all of you to look at some things that may be a bit tough to look at. So we have a confusing message for the public. This is one of many news covers that you might see, that this gentleman was dead and he's not anymore. Well, that's a really great article about how we're using cryotherapy and freezing techniques to lower the body's temperature after you have a heart attack when you're healthy, and that we can prevent brain damage. The problem with this is when someone gets this magazine and walks into the ICU and says, they can do it for him, please do it for my 98-year-old grandmother with end-stage cancer. That's my expectation of you, the healthcare worker. So take a moment, if you would, and just in your mind, picture your own death. Do you think you're going to be in your bedroom where you live now? Will you be surrounded by all your loved ones? Maybe just 1 or 2 people? Maybe a pet? Now look at the next slide and let me ask you, how many of you pictured this? That is how most people in the United States and in this room will die if you don't have clear decision-making of what you want. Now, there's nothing wrong with this death. It's just one choice you can make, but it is the default decision. If you don't make any choices, this is what happens. Now, there's alternatives to this. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with doing everything. This is someone who's an elderly person, quite ill, 2 weeks away from death. This on the left is my kid's elementary school principal with her mother. Now, it's easy to kind of go right, wrong. But, that's not really true. It's just different ways and about what you want at the end of your life. So I'm going to try to give you some very, very practical information to get wherever you want when your time comes. So first of all, if you ever have a loved one in the hospital, you can ask for what's called family meetings, where the doctor, the social worker, the nurse, the case manager all gather and inform you of what's going on with your loved one. And people sometimes, we as a hospital, and I had 11 years as a hospital executive, we don't often share this information with people, that you can have a weekly meeting with the whole medical team about what's happening with your loved one. So please know to request that. The other big secret I want to let you in on is this concept of medical benefit versus medical effect. When you are having to make decisions about your loved one, what to do, it's very, very cloudy, and this is one of those things I found that can really help you sort of get through that. We've talked about dialysis tonight. Let me use dialysis as an example. Dialysis is a wonderful technology and treatment we have. It works 100% of the time. If the kidney is failing, it clears the toxins from the bloodstream, and I can give you a lab result that will prove that dialysis has worked 100% of the time. That is the medical effect. 100% medical effect. The flip side is, does it have a medical benefit? The medical benefit is, will grandfather wake up from his coma? Will he be able to talk again? Will he be up and around? Because really what you're after as a family, you're after the medical benefit. And so you want to be sure when you're making decisions, you're making it from what's the medical benefit? Will he wake up? Will she be able to cook again? Will she be able to play with the grandkids as she enjoyed so much? Or will dialysis do no good and we'll just have a lab slip saying toxins were cleared from the bloodstream, but yet nothing else has changed? So think about applying that whenever you're making decisions for a loved one. I want to talk to you about CPR, resuscitation, specifically at the end of life, but I want to tell you about it in general. These things have become symbolic with CPR. CPR is about modern medicine, doing everything for love. Life is always worth preserving. Dignity of life must be fought for at all costs. Those are great emotional goals to have, but the technology doesn't always help us obtain them. So I want to talk about disease progression. If you have a cardiac arrest, it is usually a marker of a disease progressing. And unfortunately, many times it is a marker of an expected event. CPR is an expected event when someone is terminal. And I'm going to explain that a bit more. So first of all, who gets CPR? We hear CPR is out there, it's wonderful. Who really gets CPR? And people who usually get CPR now are the dying. We do CPR on those who are dying. Now, where do we as lay people get most of our information? Anyone know where we get most of our medical information? TV, television. So there have actually been studies of how CPR succeeds on TV. Whether they've watched ER or Chicago Hope, all the medical shows have had studies on them. And the reality is, if you watch TV, 95% of the time, CPR works on TV. You're in the hospital, you're doing horribly, you get resuscitated, and by the end of the 50-minute hour on television, you're thanking the doctors and you go home and you're fine again. Over 95%. Anyone know the reality in real life in a hospital? Less than 10%. Usually less than 5%. So it has a very high failure rate. 93, there was a major study in Canada that had a 95% failure rate. The U.S. had a 99% failure rate. Studies have been really consistent in this. So, does anyone know why we have such a high CPR failure rate in the hospital? Anyone? Do you think it's poor technique? Do you think people don't know what they're doing? Do you think the equipment's old? Why do you think the failure rate is so bad in the hospital? You're pretty close. CPR is always done on the dead. CPR is done on the dead. Think about that. We don't go up to anyone who's got a heart beating and give them CPR. Right? I'm a really practical person here. When someone dies, that's when we do CPR. So think about that concept. Think about our expectations. We are hoping to raise the dead. That's why we have such a low failure rate. Now, to go deeper and understand this, there's two categories. There is the healthy and the dead, and there is the unhealthy and the dead. So think about that. Who do you think survives CPR? Obviously, the healthy and the dead person. So think about this right now. If I was to have a cardiac arrest, I consider myself healthy. What do you think the chances are that if came in here and resuscitated me and took me to the hospital, did CPR on me, I'm pretty healthy? We would hope for a high success rate. Very different than someone who's unhealthy and dead. So now I'm going to test you a little bit. Healthy or not healthy? Not healthy. So this is unhealthy and dead. How about someone in a car accident when their heart stops? Healthy and dead. Here's your trick one. Healthy or not healthy? Unhealthy. Remember I told you she was 2 weeks before death. So her body's winding down, so she would be unhealthy. Now, I mentioned sudden cardiac arrest, which is really the reason CPR was created. So, it would be great if we could study the success rate of CPR in healthy individuals who have sudden cardiac deaths. But how would we ever study it? I mean, we could look at groups like all of us in this room. We would be the healthy. And it'd be great if we could see if one of us had a sudden cardiac arrest, if we could measure that and see what the success rate was. But it's hard to study since only 1 or 2 in every 1,000 persons has a sudden cardiac arrest. Where on earth do you think we could really study this? Somewhere where maybe there's videos and CPR people are standing by. Could you imagine a place like that? Anyone know where that place would be, where we could do a great study on healthy people who might have a heart attack, but we didn't know who or where? Las Vegas. Think of that. Every moment in a casino is on video. Every place is on video. So, security groups were trained to do CPR and defibrillation. There were video recordings so they could do times of everything that happened. And in the study, literally, it was less than 3 minutes from slot pulling, chip throwing, card game to getting CPR. 5 minutes to defibrillation. And there was an unprecedented CPR survival rate of 38%. So it's one of the highest rates they've ever seen, 38% of successful CPR. But keep in mind, 30% is still not that great. And that is with the healthiest individual. So when we look at why such a healthy success rate, first of all, if you're going to Vegas, you're probably pretty healthy. Second of all, you're high performing, you're healthy, you're active, so you are the healthy dead. The interesting thing is, even after some people were their heart was shocked and brought back, they didn't want to go to the hospital. They wanted to continue gambling. So there's a true commitment there. And yet, still 62% of the healthy died. So when you think about the statistics, the reality of CPR, and we think about our loved ones at the end of their life in the hospital, and we decide to do CPR on them because we don't want to let them go, we really have to ask about what the true medical information is here to really understanding this. And while I mentioned a lot of this is harsh, to think about this reality and Woody Allen's comment about don't mind being there when I die, it really is the lead up that scares us, that process of dying. Will we be comforted? Will we be cared for? Will we be pain-free? Dying is the lead up. So we have to make sure we know good decision making. We have courage to make those decisions when the time comes. Modern medicine, in a lot of ways, has isolated us. Think of perhaps how your grandparents did with dying and how the world has changed. In the old days, when I was growing up, you would maybe be driving down the street in any U.S. city, and all of a sudden, in your just daily life, you'd get behind a hearse going to a funeral. Well, these days, we don't have hearses driving down the street or funerals. Our dead in Los Angeles, as in many other cities in the United States, go around the city in white unmarked vans. So we don't see the dying in our world. And if you remember, perhaps your grandparents had a parlor. Their front room was called their parlor. And if you have a home now that was built before the 40s, you have a large door. And it's a large door because it was built that way so the casket could come in and out of your home. And in your parlor, you would display your loved one who had died, and friends and family would come over. Now, obviously, the funeral industry grew, and Ladies' Home Journal, the magazine, did an article years ago that said, your parlor should no longer be a room that you display the dying in. Your parlor should not be a dying room. Your parlor, your front room, should be a living room. That's why now it is called a living room versus a parlor. So think about, with all that, how we've become separated from what used to be a natural event that our grandparents and great-grandparents did. Now it occurs away from us in the hospital. And I think we're seeing a time with technology, we are trying to capture that back. So I think about, in our trying to recognize this, I reflect on things Mother taught me. Life is an achievement, and death is part of that achievement. The dying need tender, loving care. Don't do the technology and forget the tender, loving care. This is a picture with the mother I was talking to that I was able to spend time with. So I hope that sort of helps us put in perspective this new use of technology that we've been given. I look forward to continuing the conversation tonight, and I thank you for this honor of being here and talking, and hope I've been able to give you a little information that will help you someday, whether it's someone you love or just in conversation to educate others. And as mentioned, you can always find me again at grief.com. Thank you for your time, and I will look forward to speaking with you a bit later.